Good morning, good afternoon, y'all. How are you doing? Hopefully, you guys are doing okay. Look at me rapidly running into it. The reason I'm kind of going through this one pretty quick, or not the actual lecture, but the kind of the hello, is because this one does have a little bit more to it. So once again, sit back, relax. I hope you're definitely watching these, and taking what you can from them. Just before we do begin, do know that the workbook is also kind of extensive with some case studies. So make sure you keep on top of that and keep following along. Don't wait for the last minute to do it. Yeah, I give you about a week to go through these. You should not be waiting till the last moment, okay? All right, guys, now that I'm done yelling, well, let's get started. So we're on 6.3, photochemical smog. And really we're talking about, gases in the air or particulates in the air that are around the troposphere that have an effect on our lungs as well as other organisms on this planet that's in the troposphere zone or on the Earth's surface. Those are really what we're talking about today. We are going to talk about ozone here as well because remember, stated from the last lecture, ozone up in the stratosphere is a good thing, but remember there is a part of ozone that we create down here that is a bad thing. It's actually kind of poisonous to us, and we'll talk about that in this one. Okay. So first off, air pollution is the introduction of particulates, biological materials, or other harmful materials into Earth's atmosphere, possibly causing disease, death to humans, damage to the other living organisms such as food crops or other natural or building environments. That's really the term we use for environmental science. Quite extensive there. But really what it gets down to is I would add that to your workbook. But overall, it's really anything that we add to the atmosphere around us that causes a detrimental effect to living organisms. That's also kind of it summed up, right? It is estimated that more than 1 billion people are exposed to outdoor air pollution annually. Urban air pollution is linked up to 1 million premature deaths and 1 million pre-native deaths each year. Think about that. Insane. And we complain about COVID just reached 5 million people that is totally killed. So not downing COVID, of course, because that's horrendous. But just look at the numbers of gases as well, right? So it's just as humans we definitely should take COVID for seriously, but we should also take pollution more seriously as well, guys. In Bangkok, this is a problem. We have, and the season is actually coming up. We're going to have bad pollution here in the near future. It is aging you. I can tell for a fact that I was looking all young and clean, and then when I moved to Bangkok, I definitely started seeing more stuff. Just your skin ages more quickly with air pollutions. So look, if you want to stay pretty, if you want to stay handsome, fight for your right to have clean air. As I like to say, it does take away parts of your life. Urban air pollution is estimated to cost approximately 2% of the GDP in developed countries and 5% in developing countries. Just think about the health necessities that are needed to help these people out. Urbanization is a big key to this, right? People are just moving together, and when people come together, they need more stuff, and that stuff is kind of causing the more higher emissions. All right, so pretty extensive there. And here's just two, there's a graphic down here. Look at that in more detail to kind of see where a lot, what's happening with our pollution. All right, so primary pollutants. We're going to talk about primary and secondary pollutants in this course, and you'll kind of know the difference between them. But primary pollutants from the combustion of fossil fuels include carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, black carbon, soot, unburned hydrocarbon, nitrous oxide, and sulfur oxide. Those are primary pollutants, meaning once they leave wherever we create them, either in the exhaust of cars or factories, they go up, and these are the first layer of pollutants that we experience. Okay, they directly go from car to our lungs, which makes them a primary pollutant. If I could hit the next slide. So list those, have those in mind when you know what a primary pollutant is, right? Ozone, and ozone is a primary. Actually, this would be in the secondary range. What am I doing here? Hold on, pause. Sorry, guys, as I usually do, sometimes get confused. It's just how my slides are rearranged. But I did a little rearranging today. But so just keep in mind that these are the primary pollutants. So these are the ones, or not this one. These are the ones that we kind of talk about. And we'll talk about more of them, especially when we talk about particulates. But those are a list of the primary ones. Now we're going to talk about the secondary ones. And ozone is a big secondary pollutant. Now, and we'll talk about what makes it a secondary pollutant. But ozone is a toxic gas and an oxidizing agent. We're going to see as it damages humans and organisms. It really just does a lot of bad things, and we'll kind of talk about that in future in the slides. It's highly reactive and can attack fabrics and rubber materials. Really where we get most of our sources of these through transportation, cooking, dust from construction sites and roads, heating and power generation. And you can kind of look, I would stop this slide right here, but kind of see the why smog or ozone is harmful to your body, on this right side. We're going to kind of get into that a little bit more, but just know, burning eyes, throat, irritated, mucous membranes, shortened breath, wheezing, coughing, asthma attacks, chest pains when inhaling, increased risk of respiratory diseases, increased risk of heart attack, pulmonary inflammation. So just know, I like that little graphic because it really sums up ozone for you. And then it also has on the right side how ozone forms, but we'll kind of talk about that in a second. But oxygen in the atmosphere, then with nitric oxide, which is a combustion, and then really sun breaks them up and then makes them collide, and then takes away the oxygen molecule, which then forms O3, forming ozone in our trophic zone as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. But we'll talk about this much more. If I can change slides. There we go. In the presence of sunlight, here's what I was talking about. I wish, so this is why I kind of got confused. But this slide should be before the last one. But there's a difference between primary pollutants and secondary pollutants, right? In the presence of sunlight, secondary pollutants are formed when primary pollutants undergo a variety of reactions with other chemicals already present in the atmosphere. So really, secondary pollutants are a byproduct of primary pollutants when they interact with the atmosphere and the solar radiation. What we have is, carbon dioxide that then breaks down, and then these, as we can see from this graphic, these primary pollutants go up into the atmosphere, get pushed up, maybe and more so with global warming. Then they react with the sunlight, and then they form these secondary pollutants. And secondary pollutants really include ozone, hydrocarbons, nitrogen oxide, and then NO2. Which is formed as NO combines with oxygen in the air. Then it forms acid rain, which is then formed from sulfur dioxide or nitrogen oxide reacting with water. So, really what we're getting at here is primary pollutants are the stuff that's given right out of factories, as are well of our cars or pollutants. And then secondary pollutants are those that are formed due to interactions with water as well as solar radiation. Okay, put it plainly and simply. So all these really mean that burning the fossil fuels and release of nitrogen monoxide, which then goes through a process to form ozone. As we can see, NO2 plus sunlight then equals breaks, it just forms NO. Then we have an extra oxygen molecule. Then that oxygen molecule goes into O2, which then forms ozone, right? And then ozone can then further be broken down into O2 or nitrous dioxide. Sorry. Once again, guys, too early for chemistry. But, really we have this process because of the sunlight. It's breaking it down, forming it into worse and worse things. So the ozone that is a byproduct of certain human activities becomes a problem at ground level. With increasing populations, more automobiles, and more industry, there's more ozone in the lower atmosphere, right? Because you just have more stuff that's given off, then there's a secondary reaction, which then forms more ozone. Since 1900, the amount of ozone near the Earth's surface has more than doubled. Unlike most other air pollutants, ozone is not directly emitted from any one source, right? It's not a primary, source. It's a secondary pollute, right? Tropospheric ozone is formed by the interaction of sunlight, particularly ultraviolet light, with hydrocarbons and nitrogen oxide, which then are emitted by automobiles, gasoline vapors, fossil fuel power plants, refineries, and certain other industries. Really, I think I said all that, but that's kind of more put. I should stay with my script, right? When it comes to what I put in the slides, but you get the point, right? We have these primary pollutants, interaction with sun and water, and then that forms secondary pollutants, and ozone is one of them. All right, and just here's kind of another cool example or a photo of it, right? This kind of breaks down the primary pollutants and then the formation of secondary pollutants. So pause it, we'll look at those, get an idea of what fits underneath what category. Do you need to know all of them? You need to know the big ones. I would definitely know the primary pollutants and then some of the big secondary pollutants, especially ozone, that being a big one. And also nitric acid we'll kind of talk about, and then, we will have another lecture about acid rain, which then kind of we'll talk, that fits in the secondary pollutant category. And here's another one just for your viewing pleasure, right, of how tropospheric ozone forms through these processes of fossil fuels. Then you have warming, or even with, then I like this one because it adds the global warming. Just know that global warming just isn't about rising temperatures, but it also increases pollutants, right? Because you have this heating that pushes these bad toxic gases up higher, then they become these even more horrendous secondary problems, particulates in in our atmosphere. So do know that global warming has an amplifying effect to this process. So now we're going to kind of talk about the effects of ozone on on us as well as on plants. Ground level ozone causes more damage to plants than all other air pollutants combined. Classic symptoms of ozone injury, and shows how ozone affects yields of several major crops, right? We can see from this photo, it really starts to break down plant compounds pretty much on a very wide scale, depending on how much ozone is in the atmosphere. Okay, so here we're kind of breaking down the levels of ozone exposure it has to plant life. I know in your workbook there's a question on how does it affect it, and there's kind of a little section of it, right? But with that being said, maybe write down how some of these that you can at least come back on and talk about, right? Just a heads up in the quiz might have a few of these as well, right? But first off, through leaf metabolism and physiology, antioxidant metabolism's unregulated, right? There's decreased photosynthesis, decreased stomatal. Mr. Bryan would yell at me for that. Conductance, or sluggish stomatal response. Oh my, if I should be asking him, but right, we really, even at the the physiological level, at the very basics, it really stops the photosynthesis and kind of breaks down those cells. Then through leaves and canopy, we have visible leaf injury, altered leaf senescence, and altered leaf chemical composition, right? So leaves just start to deteriorate, and we see this brown coating on them. And then it really stunts plant growth, decreased biomass accumulation, altered reproduction, altered carbon allocation, and altered crop quality, right? So overall, the plant just suffers. It just doesn't stop the photosynthesis, but then, once you stop photosynthesis, it really stops the growth of the plant. And then below ground processes, we have altered litter production and decomposition. We just don't have, it breaking down, because you have less plants. Altered soil carbon and nutrient cycling, then altered soil fauna and microbial communities, right? So it really does affect this whole biome of systems when, there is a lot of ozone in the atmosphere. And then, really just when it comes to the whole ecosystem services on this right side, we just have decreased productivity, decreased sequestration. Oh my, what the words I'm using today. Decreased sequestration. Hold on. Sea sequestration. All right, let's go with that. Altered water cycling, altered community composition, i.e., plants, insects, and microbes. Guys, don't laugh, right? Sometimes some of these terms are pretty difficult, but understanding the process of them is paramount to environmental science. But obviously, we have this real breakdown of plant life when there's ozone around it, right? Ozone, just to kind of continue this on, right? But we have ozone degrades chlorophyll, so photosynthesis and productivity are reduced, damages crops and forests and humans, it irritates eyes, causes breathing difficulties, and may increase susceptibility to infection. Highly reactive and can damage fabrics and rubber. So just, ozone is not a pretty thing when it's down here on the troposphere. And then just one more time, I think we already kind of stated this, but how ozone forms in the atmosphere, right? We have oxygen, and then, we have NO2, then it really is broken down, and then, we have release of the oxygen molecule, which then goes in for, it adds itself to oxygen, which then forms ozone due to the solar radiation breaks those processes down. So once again, ozone is a secondary pollutant. And then hydrocarbons come from burning fossil fuels and speed up the formation of NO2, which then pushes that out. And then I had that listed for you. Nitrogen oxides and VOCs come from road transport, solvents release, and petrol handling. And then, once again, I think I already say this, but those go up, they break down through the sun, and then ozone is formed. Okay. And then now kind of the human effects of a ground level ozone, the ill effects of them, and also fine particulates. We'll talk about them in a moment, but fine particulates, actually let's stick with ground level ozone because we're kind of finishing up that, but difficulty breathing deeply, shortness of breath, sore throat, wheezing, coughing, fatigue. Ozone can make these conditions worse. Asthma and emphysema is made worse by ozone. Now we're going to kind of go on to fine particulates, or PM 2.5, which you're well aware of living here in Thailand. And really, these things can cause shortness of breath, wheezing, coughing, chest pains, fatigue. Fine particulates can make these conditions worse. Cardiovascular and heart disease, asthma, and COPD. Just know that also they did a study, and it brings back to the whole aging thing. But people who do spend more time breathing these things in tend to age much more rapidly. It has not only just these lung problems here and disease problems, it also affects the outside cells as well. So once again, not a pretty thing you want to have around you, right? And what is PM 2.5, right? What is formation of particulates? Burning organic materials or fossil fuels releases small particulates of carbon or other substances, really. So really burning them, this is really what it comes down to, is burning them. Combustion releases these carbon or, carbon substances into the atmosphere. We call them particulates or particulate matter, PM10 or PM 2.5. And then these particulates are not filtered by our nose or lungs, so can cause problems in our respiratory system. They really just go into our lungs, get stuck there, and as we saw, can cause all kinds of nasty little things to you, right? And then, then really kind of bringing it all together, what is the formation of smog? I want to clarify, smog is really a mix between all these things. Smog is ozone. Smog is particulate matter. Smog is nitrogen oxide. It's really just all this pollution that's up in the air. That's really what smog is. So smog is the overall term for each of these individual ones. But all together that cause a kind of a 1-2 punch, because there's so much things going into our lungs and what we're breathing in. But as we can see, there's different types of smog, just because different smog has different, amounts of different things. Some have more ozone, some have more particulate matter, right? I would say in Thailand we have a nice mix of all of them. Ozone, nitrogen oxides, and gaseous hydrocarbons interact with strong sunlight, and then they create these complex recreations create many chemicals, that then form this layer of soot and mixture in the atmosphere around us. A mixture of about 100 different air pollutants with ozone is ozone being the main one, really makes smog altogether. And we'll kind of talk about that in the next one as well, because we kind of get into, ozone, or not ozone, I'm sorry, acid rain, and that also plays in smog creation as well. But then I'll let you kind of look at this. But the frequency and severity of smog in an area depends on local topography, climate, population density, and fossil fuel use. Right? Well, duh, kind of thing. But I really want to stress that it really depends on where you are. Now, I think a lot of times we can look at certain cities in China. We can look at like LA. We can look at Mexico City, going back, London, right? And you might say, well, they look way worse than Bangkok does. But I will let you know here, I think Bangkok produces just as much smog as the other ones. Why? But why is it different? Why don't we always have a sky that looks like that? Well, it's because of the topography that we live in, right? We are lucky enough to kind of live in the bottom of a valley, which then the air flows and pushes most of that away. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, we have most of our air problems that are in the months, and usually in February and March. Why? Because the winds change. The winds start to die down, and then we're stuck pretty much breathing in what we create for ourselves, right? Most of the year it gets blown away from us, so we don't have to deal with it. But due to topography, during certain months is worse than others, and that's why it's February, March. It tends to get much worse because of these areas we're living in. But once again, so it's created by all these things like factory burning, cars, and then it really depends on your topography and climate about how it pushes that stuff around. As we can see, we're kind of look at two different things here, but London smog is different than California smog, right? Or Mexico smog, right? They're different from each other because it just depends on what happens, what type of topography, what type of pollutants are being put in the air. So London smog, completely different. This occurs at low temperatures. Main pollutants include sulfur dioxide and smoke particulates from burning coal. Caused a lot of deaths until the introduction of the Clean Air Act, really. So, just know there are different types of smog out there. And the occurrence of photochemical smogs, is governed by a number of factors. I think we already kind of talked about that, right? But we have local topography. Example, cities lying in valleys, sheltered from the wind, tend to have more. Thermal inversion, warm days or a warmer layer of air above the city prevents air from rising, so it kind of keeps the stuff in. Climate, right? If you have more, rain clears smog. If you have a higher population, that's going to definitely dictate how much smog you have, and then just the amount of fossil fuel use in an area. And this just kind of shows you the climate, the thermal inversion on this bottom picture. But when you have cool air, it tends to hold in more smog at the bottom, and then if you have warm air above it, well, then it kind of holds it down into it. So do know it just depends on the temperature of the actual area as well. And we kind of talk about that a little bit here, thermal inversion, right? And really, thermal inversion occurred due to lack of air movement. When a layer of dense cool air is trapped beneath a layer of less dense warm air, this causes concentration of air pollutants to build up near the ground instead of being dissipated by normal air movements, right? Luckily, here in Thailand, once again, Bangkok, we don't have to deal with this as much, right? But in certain areas, it definitely has this problem. What we see here going on from kind of these graphs. But we have warm air down here, and then we have cool air, and then cooler air. So when it slowly kind of cools as it goes up, it kind of allows that release of air. And that's for Bangkok most of the year. But sometimes you get this flip, which has cool air at the bottom, then a warm layer that kind of traps the rest of that smog in, which can cause more and more problems and creates more smog, right? So it just depends on the area of what's happening. And once again, this kind of happens in February and March, where it's slightly at the cooler end of winter, right? So we have this kind of switch of temperatures that can go on. And a big part of this, as well as Bangkok, is just deforestation and burning also contributes to smog. This is huge in Thailand, I would say. And as you're going to see, same thing with Indonesia in your workbook, talking about a case study. But really the biggest thing is, smog, but this definitely adds particulate matters into the air. When you burn biomass, it really sets these things up into the air, which then really contributes to these things called smog, right? So burning forests increases greenhouse gases in the atmosphere by releasing the CO2 stored in the biomass, and also by removing the forest so that it cannot store it, right? So you're killing the thing that would normally take these things in. As with all forms of air pollutant, the smoke from biomass burning often spreads far, and pollutants can plague neighboring states or countries. And that's what happens here in Thailand. Also, February and March is when you have an increase in rice field burning, right? So, the farmers are burning the rice field, and then that smoke comes into Bangkok, really, right? So do know that, this is kind of a big part of what's going on here in Thailand. And then kind of talking about this, I will let you guys kind of, this is actually a case study in your workbook, so I'll kind of let you kind of go through this when you're doing that. But it talks about Indonesia as emissions, and really kind of due to this burning of forest and biomass really is what's causing their biggest problems. And then, it's kind of, we're kind of getting to the end of this, but, really stressing is, we know that smog, we know that, these chemicals are bad for living organisms, but, even if we don't care about our neighbors, even if we don't care about our health, or we live in a nice house that has, nice, clean pumps out, you have to think about the economic loss caused by, urban air pollution, right? It's one of the most, it kills so many people. It causes so many, different diseases, heart and lung diseases, asthma conditions, right? Reduced quality of life, a decreased amount of life as well. And these increased hospital admissions, right? So we have this huge, ill effect of that we're paying for the healthcare system because of air pollution. Billions upon billions of dollars are spent on this every year to just, work on health. Now, think about this, right? What if we spent those billions and billions of dollars instead of fixing or trying to put a Band-Aid on the problem, but we fixed the problem at the heart, right? What if we started eliminating, car use or factory pollutants in the air, right? If we put the billions of dollars towards that, would that not be a more useful, use of our money, right? Or our funds, and people would obviously live healthier and happier lives. So it's just kind of getting you to think about, how humans once again do dumb things, right? We're paying for the effects when we should be paying to solve the problem. And a kind of example here is in Mexico City, such economic damages due to air pollution are estimated at 1.5 billion per year. That's just Mexico City, ladies and gentlemen. Right? Crazy. In Jakarta, 14,000 deaths, about 2% of annual deaths in the city, could be avoided every year if particulate could be kept at the level recommended by the WHO, World Health Organization. The researchers asserted that the health effects of air pollution are massive. It causes huge economic losses in terms of loss of current workforce, treatment costs, unemployment loss, and so on, right? So just know there's, even if you're looking at it from a business owner standpoint, it's smart to fix these problems because you are paying through taxes or other means to solve, to help people with these type of problems. So, and then I like this one, but the World Health Organization estimates that about 700,000 deaths annually could be prevented in developing countries if you eliminate just 3 atmospheric pollutants, right? How crazy is that? Crazy, crazy, crazy. And just in more terms, right? You don't have to know the specifics on these. I won't ever require them, but these are just estimated deaths and economic losses caused this year by PM 2.5 based on pollution being the same as 2010 levels. So this is from 2010, and they're higher than that now, right? But these are the amount of deaths associated with it. This is just in China. Crazy, right? And how much money could be saved. Now, the rest of these slides really talk about, how do we pollution management strategies, right? But I like to think that you guys know these already, right? Like it's kind of one of those dumbest situations. Really, the whole idea is to eliminate those primary pollutants in the first place. Then they don't become these horrendous secondary pollutants, right? And this is also a problem when we talk about global warming. Same kind of things that you can think of that to stop global warming would stop these type of problems, right? But I'll kind of go through the list, but altering human activity to consume less fossil fuels, right? Include the purchase of energy efficient technologies, or shared transit and walking and cycling, regulating and reducing pollutants at the point of emission through government regulation or taxation, using catalytic to converters to clean the exhaust of primary pollutants from car exhaust. These are really just things that it's pretty much just a filter that you can put on your car, or sometimes factories, right? And then it cleans out the exhaust before, and then you just, what goes up in the air is water vapor. Regulating fuel quality by governments, adopting cleanup measures such as reforestation, regreening, and conservation of areas to sequester carbon dioxide. I would also kind of put in, education methods to farmers, right? Like in Thailand, I think that'd be big, of having them able to reintroduce that bio waste back into their ground, right? And through better means without burning it, would also help out these situations, right? And here it kind of talks about, management strategies, but, here's a bunch of more that you can kind of go through. But measures to reduce fossil fuel combustion should be considered. Duh, right? For example, reducing demand for electricity in private cars and switching to renewable energy. Refer to cleanup measures, for example, catalytic converters. Once again, management strategies. We can stop the cause, so bring down cars, buses, and taxis. Use more public transportation. Really, electricity. Bring down the use of electricity, or use renewable energy sources. Release and transfers, monitor and regulate. This is, if people do have to take private cars or taxis, well then, make them cleaner, right? Use cleaner fuels and clean up emissions. And then just, and finally we can kind of take the effects step, where just smog prevention, design and plan a city building to promote natural cooling and circulation, rather than keeping that smog in, and just raise awareness and conditions of health effects. Educate the city or the community that you live in, right? And I think finally, guys, this is kind of extensive here, but just this kind of goes through, this offers a big list of things that you can kind of do to, stop, bring down photochemical smog, right? Bringing down, those primary pollutants. So, most in some, things to consider when we're talking here. Most urban pollutants comes from transportation, particularly private cars, right? So don't buy a car, right? I don't. Not to say that I couldn't. It's more just like, what's the need in Bangkok? I can take either BTS or I carpool. 80% of the car pollution comes from only 30% of the cars, just meaning, you've seen this, right? You see those big trucks, or trucks that definitely have no exhaust filter on them, and just this black soot is just flying out of the back of them. You've seen it. Diesel engines in trucks and buses produce more particulates. That's the trucks I'm kind of talking about. Restrictions and tools can make car use expensive. There may be cultural resistance to public transportation, and monitoring and regulating is complicated and expensive, right? So you can kind of go through these strategies. I would highly recommend going through them. But once again, they kind of fit along the same lines of, stopping global warming, because they're kind of the same kind of stuff that goes up into the atmosphere. So, all right, guys, that is a long one. I'll probably give you a little more time on this. Stop, do whatever you need to for this lecture. Pace yourself through it, and ask me any questions that you need. Like I said, I kind of stumbled over a few words, so this is my most beautiful one. But I think it's one of those things where a lot of this is kind of straightforward, except for some of those technical terms. But there will be a quiz on this one, so please be ready for that. Other than that, guys, have a great day. Enjoy life, and enjoy that workbook. It is a big one, but it's very useful, and make sure you take good notes in it.